Howdy, buddy. Welcome into another edition of the List Podcast brought to you by The Man Salon, themansalon.net. I don't get my haircut every day, but when I do, I go to The Man Salon. Check them out. Wonderful folks in and around the Midwest and here in South Dakota. I'm excited to have this guy on the show today because we've talked baseball for years. He's from Forbes. He's a New York native, so I'm sure there has to be at least one New Yorker on this list that we're going to get to. Wayne McDonnell Jr. Wayne, welcome in, buddy. Welcome to the list. How you doing, man?
Jeff, what an honor. All the years of us talking baseball, now we're taking it to the next level. This is so exciting for me. So thank you once again for the invite, and we're going to have a real good time today.
So for those that are tuning in for the first time, here's how it works. We have a top 10 list, and then we get to a top 5 list. The top 10 list, very specific to the guests that we're having on. The top 5 list, a little bit more of that, but also a little bit of sometimes entertainment, pop culture, life, fun. So what we're going to do today is have the top 10 scariest, most intimidating pitchers of all time, and then we're going to get to the top 5 baseball movies. Now, Wayne, I'll tell you this, and you may know this about me from the years that we've talked. A lot of my references are like 1985 and to present day, so I can't go back into the 1950s, 60s, 70s and say I watched any of that. Now, I do have a couple of guys on my list that were dominating pre-85, but you're a baseball historian. I assume you have a couple of dudes on your list that pitched before 85.
Without question.
Okay, good. I assume so. So here's how we'll do it. We'll go 10 through 6 and then 5 through 1, okay? And since you're the guest, the floor is yours. Who's 10 through 6 on your most intimidating, scariest pitchers of all time list?
Okay, I start off with Bob Feller at number 10. Okay, back in the day, Cleveland Indians, now Cleveland Guardians, nicknamed Rapid Robert because of that fastball, without question. And back then, they didn't have the radar guns, so what they did was, in 1938, they had him race against a police officer on a motorcycle in Chicago to get velocity. And long story short, he clocked in about 100 miles an hour, where the police motorcycle was about 86 to 90. So very rough estimate of timing and velocity back then, but Bob Feller, number 10 on my list. Number 9, Juan Marichal, the Dominican dandy, the high leg kick, the dominating pitcher. In my opinion, probably one of the most dominating pitchers to have never won a Cy Young Award in the Cy Young era.
Why did he win?
Well, you're pitching with Sandy Koufax and Bob Gibson and Don Drysdale. It's a little tough back in the 60s. We have that talent, but you know, synonymous with that 16-inning ball game, which we just had the anniversary a couple of days ago, between him and Warren Spahn, the 1-0 shutout. And he's also synonymous with something that he probably never wanted to be synonymous with, and that was a brawl between the Dodgers back in '65, where he took a bat to catch a Johnny Roseboro. But without question, probably one of the most intimidating pitchers of all time, but definitely in the decade of the 60s. My number 8, Jeff, I'm going to show a little baseball history here. Walter Johnson, the big train. Now, none of us saw Walter Johnson pitch because he was at the turn of the 20th century. But the best way I'll describe Walter Johnson is a very famous quote from a very famous hitter by the name of Ty Cobb. He used to call Walter Johnson just speed, raw speed, blinding speed, too much speed. And he takes it a step further and said, Walter Johnson's fastball hissed with danger. Wow. He got his nickname, the Big Train, from Grantland Rice, who said, at that point in time, trains were the fastest thing known to mankind. So it was Walter Johnson. So Walter Johnson is 8 on my list.
I'm going to interrupt here because I just for sort of the awe factor here, I have a good friend named Jeff Hauge who has a baseball that's autographed by not only Walter Johnson, but also by Babe Ruth on the same baseball. He got it authenticated about a year and a half ago. His grandma was living in Chicago at the time, and she got it signed. And so, it had been passed down, and he wasn't sure, like it looked real. We sent it in, and PSA authenticated it as the real deal, Walter Johnson and Babe Ruth on the same baseball. Not only is that thing worth a lot of money, but that thing has all kinds of baseball history written all over it. And actually, to be honest with you, like I've heard the name Walter Johnson, but when he got that baseball, I did a little research and helped him get it authenticated. but the fact that you have those two people on one baseball is pretty special.
Well, also to their original Hall of Fame class.
Yeah.
And if you're talking about turn of the 20th century in terms of some of the biggest names, doesn't get bigger than Babe Ruth. And in terms of pitching, it's Walter Johnson and Christy Mathewson, 1 and 1A, if you really ask about it. But Walter Johnson was the original intimidator.
He's
And
number
so
7 on your list. All right, we got 10, 9, 8. So who's next?
number 7, Sandy Koufax.
Ooh.
And
we're the modern day guys, man. I don't got anybody post 85 yet.
Oh, they're coming.
Okay.
So here's the thing: when you look at Sandy Koufax, 300 innings pitched, 300 strikeout seasons, 63 to 66, just flat out dominated. Early in his career with the Brooklyn Dodgers, little struggle with control and command. Once he figured it out, flat out dominated. So he's my 7th on the list. And number 6, before we transition to you, my friend, Pedro Martinez.
Ooh, that's an interesting one.
And here's why. You grew, watching baseball in the early 1990s to the 2000s, Pedro dominated. And you looked at him, 5'9", 5'10", 165 pounds. But once he got control, confidence, and command together, he was terrifying. And then here's the thing. He earned a reputation as being a headhunter. And if you look at a lot of the brawls in the 90s and early 2000s, a lot of them were started by Pedro.
Yeah.
So a very dominating pitcher, a very scary pitcher, 3 Cy Young Awards from 1997 to 2000, and, fierce intimidator. So those are my my 10 through 6 right now.
And Pedro, so I got a couple here, like Walter Johnson and Bob Feller. Like I put them on my honorable mention list, and it was more so that I was reading about them. I didn't get to watch them. And a lot of times with these lists, it's more about sort of the impression you got when you were watching them. And sometimes I like to throw in the older guys just because they were so great. And the one that I was on the outside. So my number 10 and Pedro Martinez were the two that I wrestled with. And I wanted to put Pedro in. He was on my honorable mention list because at number 10, I got Justin Verlander. The dude can go over. He's always been able to get up to 100. He was a strikeout king at times. And for such a long, prolonged period of time, he's been dominant in Major League Baseball. And so for the longevity factor, and I mean, think about it. We didn't have a lot of starting pitchers getting up to 100 miles an hour over the last 15, 20 years. Now we see the numbers. They're astronomical, and you got guys that are chucking it triple digits on a regular basis. But I had Verlander at number 10. And at number 9, the dude did not throw heat. It isn't because he was a guy that pitched, really fast balls down the middle and just, challenged you. It was the fact that you knew he was going to throw a changeup and you couldn't hit it. And his name is Greg Maddux. Okay. And so that had to be mentally messed up as a hitter when you knew a ball was coming sub 90 and you could not hit that ball, right? And he was so perfect and pinpoint accurate with his pitches. He'd mix it up a little bit, but that changeup was so depth from the Cubs to the Braves. And being a big Braves fan, I watched him dominate without having to throw major heat. And that had to be intimidating when you looked at the scouting report, Wayne.
Well, question. I look at Greg Maddux, and I think you and I have talked about this. When he got inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame, I went to the press conference in New York City where they introduced everyone. And I'm in a small group of reporters talking with him. And Tyler Kepner of the New York Times asked him specifically when he knew he kind of lost it. Maddux had it down to the pitch, the time, the date. He had everything. And I always viewed him as one of the most cerebral pitchers, probably one of the most brilliant pitchers of all time. And you took our definition of fear, intimidation, and dominating to an entirely different level, which is awesome because if you talk to a lot of hitters from that generation, they didn't want to face Maddux.
No, they knew it. And not to mention you had Smoltz and Glavine coming in between that as well, man. That had to mess with them as well. At number 8, not prolonged periods of dominance, but for a stretch. And it was sort of, I think, the revival of the triple-digit pitch for closers in Major League Baseball. I got number 8, Aroldis Chapman, okay? And you're a New York guy, so when he came chucking with Cincinnati and eventually landed with the Cubs and with the Yankees, there were moments where he was unhittable in the ninth. And of course, that's fallen off now compared to where it was. But I remember him coming up and they would go to, Sports Center would only have the ninth inning of the Reds. And it was just Aroldis Chapman chucking 100 miles an hour. And in my lifetime, he just stood out as a guy that I know if I was in the batter's box, anything that came close to the inside of the plate, I'm diving out. And I think that is so intimidating. And you saw it too, like dudes just could not hit Aroldis Chapman. And number 7, this one's going back a little bit for me, but I saw him at the end of his career, and the way that he pitched throughout his entire career was magnificent. He's a Hall of Famer. Dennis Eckersley is number 7 on my list. You could probably speak more to Dennis Eckersley, though, Wayne, than I can, but I just remember like early on baseball thoughts when people would talk about dominant pitchers, Dennis Eckersley was on that Mount Rushmore when I was growing up in the early 90s.
He was in my top 15.
Okay.
Without question. Really he was a starter.
Then became
then he became a closer, and then he really under Tony La Russa redefined what that position was. Goose Gossage, another person, he definitely was on my top 15, but he took basically the mantle for the baton from him and took it to the next level where Dennis Eckersley won a Most Valuable Player award as a reliever.
Isn't that crazy, man? Wayne McDonnell Jr., Forbes. I'm Jeff Turn. This is the List Podcast. iTunes, Spotify, YouTube. Check them out. All those places brought to you by the Man Salon. And at number 6, I hated this dude growing up. There was 2 baseball, actually 3. And they all were on the Minnesota Twins on that 1991 team. Number 1, I hated Kirby Puckett because I felt like the hands of God lifted that little chubby guy up to catch that home run and rob my Braves. I hated Kent Herbeck because he pushed Ron Gant off first base. And then I hated Jack Morris that for some reason he was able to outpitch John Smoltz in a game that I think goes down as the greatest pitched World Series game of all time, Game 7, 1991. And Jack Morris, I have done events with in my adult life, and I love the guy. Kent Herbeck, I have done many events with, and I actually text him throughout the year, and we get along great. I still remind him of pushing Ron Gant off first base. He still claims momentum carried Ron Gant off first base. I obviously never got to hang out with Kirby Puckett in my adult life, but Jack Morris was like, if I could think of a big game pitcher that I would want after watching him in 1991, Jack Morris would come to mind. Dominating in the biggest stage and had so many big games over his career. I got Jack Morris at number 6. Is he too high on my list, though?
No, I think, this is beauty is in the eye of the beholder when you really think about it. And if you look at the decade of the 1980s, he's the winningest pitcher of the decade of the 1980s. Reason why it took him forever to get into the Baseball Hall of Fame is, he wasn't an analytics darling.
Yep.
He pitched in a different era where the Tigers would put up 8 runs. He pitched a complete game, gear up 6 runs.
Right.
But it was, hey, you won. At the end of the day, the win statistic mattered. Now, today we're in a vastly different era, but when you look back at that era to which he pitched in, he dominated. And, the ornery personality as well added to the mystique.
It did. That's why he was like scary, intimidating. He brought sort of like a football mentality to the mound, and that's why I have him at number 6. Wayne McDonnell Jr. with me here on the List Podcast. All right, man, 5 through 1. What do you got?
Well, we're going to start number 5 with Roger Clemens. Okay, and
the Rocket.
I had a front row seat for a very long time to Roger Clemens, and I'm not talking only about 2000 with the bat throwing episode in the World Series and hitting Mike Piazza and giving him a concussion, where he actually missed the All-Star game as a result of that. My first real recollection of Clemens's intensity, 1990 ALCS against the Oakland Athletics. He's pitching for the Red Sox. He wore eye black on the pitcher's mouth. And it's like, wow, that kind of jolted me. He wore a mouth guard when he pitched because he was so intense. I remember watching him closely where he was so amped up those first couple of innings. The intensity was off the charts where he had to calm down. So Roger Clemens is my number 5. My number 4, Don Drysdale, Hall of Fame pitcher for the Los Angeles Dodgers. On his Hall of Fame plaque, they make a reference to intimidating style and durability.
That's perfect for this list.
Right.
Yes.
But when I think of Drysdale, I think of Mickey Mantle. Now, Mantle only faced him 5 times in his career, and it happened in the World Series, 1956 and 1963. But Mantle had a beautiful quote about Drysdale. He said, "I hated facing Don Drysdale. The guy would hit you with a pitch. He'd walk over, look at the bruise on your arm, and ask you if you wanted to have it autographed." So that was Drysdale. And Drysdale took it a step further and says, "I play 2 for 1. If one of my teammates on the Dodgers is brushed back, I'm taking out 2 of the
That's
opponents."
amazing.
So Don Drysdale is my number 4 on the list. My number 3, the big unit, Randy Johnson. So think of it from this perspective. He's 6'10", had a lot of control issues very early on in his career with the Montreal Expos, and people didn't think anything was going to really develop. But when you have the wingspan of a pterodactyl and the 747, it takes a long time to figure it out. But think of it from this perspective: 60 feet 6 inches. He's 6'10". By the time he figured it out, he cut down the distance in terms of the fastball getting to home plate. And that fastball was going 97 to 100 miles per hour. And he dominated for all the eras to which he was in, particularly with the mustache, the
Yep.
hair,
Oh yeah.
the presence. And then don't talk about the All-Star games, 1993, 1997. John Crook and Larry Walker got scared with some wild pitches from Randy Johnson. So he's my number 3 on the list. My number 2, Nolan Ryan. So it starts for me with that Robin Ventura brawl. Now, at that time, Nolan Ryan's like 44 years old, and he's got, Robin Ventura, and he was 46. Got him in a headlock. He's punching him and everything. That was the last batter that Nolan Ryan hit in his Hall of Fame career. He didn't get ejected. Robin Ventura got ejected. Ryan finishes the game, 7 innings, gets the victory. Besides the 5,000 plus strikeouts and the longevity, the guy was throwing triple digits before it was really measured in great honesty. But I also remember one time Bo Jackson hit a ground ball, hit him in the lip, busted his lip, got the out, and he was pitching with blood coming out of his mouth. So Nolan Ryan is my number 2.
Okay,
And
who's number 1 then?
Bob Gibson.
Oh
So
man. I'm glad
so
you got Bob at 1, and I can't wait to get to my top 5, but go ahead.
Think of it this way from Bob Gibson. In 1968, we know it's the year of the pitcher. He had a 1.12 ERA, 268 strikeouts over 304 2/3 innings pitched. They had to lower the mound from 15 inches to 10 inches. Now, it was the year of the pitcher, 68, but if that were the case, Bob Gibson was the valedictorian of that year. And if you want to look at it from another perspective, if he wasn't going to hit you in the ribs with a fastball, he was going to strike you out with the slider. So for me, Bob Gibson is my number 1.
Okay, I'm glad you got Bob there. I'm going to get to him. He's on my top 5. At number 5, I also had Roger Clemens, and you brought it up. The intensity that you saw on the mound, it just exuded out of his body. You could tell all he cared about was winning. And I always felt like you got 110% from Roger Clemens, whether you were buying a ticket, whether you were a teammate, or whether you were at bat. I always thought Roger Clemens brought it every single night, whether it was in Toronto, whether it was in Boston, Houston, there in New York. Like I was always a fan of his intensity and the fact that he cared so much about winning. I'm surprised you didn't have my number 4 on your list, Mariano Rivera. That's the one way that I thought we would both have. And I just think most dominating closer I've ever seen. When you heard Enter Sandman, it was just lights out, man. Like he's coming out, game over. Y'all ain't going to win this thing. And whether it was in the 8th to get 5 outs or 4 outs or 6 outs, or whether it was in the 9th to just get 3, I always thought Mariano was just so dominant at that closer position that he had to be so scary to the opposing team. You're down by 1, put a rally cap on, have a rally monkey. It doesn't matter. You're not going to win this thing.
He's another example. I would say when I first put mine together, I had 15, and he's in that that 5 there with Eckersley and Goose Gossage and
Sure.
Mariano. And look, another person I had a ringside seat to for a very long time, and maybe we've taken him for granted. because he was so automatic. And,
Yep.
same type of thing. You weren't dealing with a 98-mile-per-hour fastball. You were dealing with a cut fastball, 90 to 92, but had tremendous movement. But, a unanimous Hall of Famer and someone who was an absolute pleasure to watch, but flat out dominated in every aspect of the game. If you can only remember his flaws, which were two, Cleveland, and then in Arizona in 2001 World
Arizona.
Series. If those are the only two that you can remember about someone's career, on top of the saves and everything, unbelievable. And what an honor and privilege it has been to watch basically the length of his entire career.
At number 3, I have Bob Gibson as well. And my grandfather was a huge Cardinals fan. I actually have in this office. I have, and I'm gonna do this. This is what we're gonna do. We're gonna take a. Just hold on. I'm grabbing it. I gotta show you. I do not kid you when I say I have a Bob Gibson. There we go. Autographed photo.
Awesome.
Isn't that great? That's black and white.
That's fantastic.
Doesn't that just embody Bob Gibson right there? The black and white photo. My grandfather was a big Bob Gibson fan. I have an autographed baseball from him as well. And there were two players he always talked about. Stan Musial, who, by the way, wrote back to my grandfather on a postcard and signed it. Another piece of memorabilia that I have from Stan. And Bob Gibson was the other one he always talked about. Later on, talked a little bit about Ozzie like that, Ozzie Smith. But those were the guys. And I remember a story I heard once about Bob Gibson where there were players on his team that would come up and try to ask about his pitching style. And he didn't really want to give them a lot of information because he was nervous that one day they would be on another team and they would have some sort of advantage over him. And I just felt like that was the ultimate competitor. And when you ask like older baseball players, who was the toughest to face? Bob Gibson's name always comes up as well. At number 2, I got Nolan Ryan. I mean, before my number 1, he was the guy that everybody was intimidated by. And you detailed out sort of the dominance from Nolan Ryan during his Hall of Fame career. But at number 1 for me, and this is like me being 38 and living through it, I don't remember the Expo days of Randy Johnson. I remember the days when he was with Ken Griffey Jr. and Alex Rodriguez and Martinez, and like they were coming up, and then he goes on to have that 1-2 punch with Curt Schilling in the Arizona Diamondbacks. And I don't know if this is the top reason he should be number 1. The man killed a bird while he was throwing a pitch, and not only killed the bird, eviscerated the bird. The bird evaporated once he got hit by the baseball from Randy Johnson. And so I think of you mentioned it, the hair, the mustache, like it felt like he could beat you up and then he could also strike you out. And so I have Randy Johnson at number 1. Let's go through it, Wayne. 10 through 1. I'll give you mine again, and you can give me yours. I got Verlander at 10, Greg Maddux at 9, Aroldis Chapman at 8, Dennis Eckersley at 7, Jack Morris at number 6, Roger Clemens at 5, Mariano Rivera at 4, Bob Gibson at 3, Nolan Ryan at 2, and Randy Johnson at 1. Recap your top 10.
So I got Bob Filler at 10, Juan Marichal at 9, Walter Johnson at 8, Sandy Koufax at 7, Pedro Martinez at 6, Roger Clemens at 5, Don Drysdale at 4, Randy Johnson at 3, Nolan Ryan at 2, and Bob Gibson at 1.
Wayne McDonnell Jr. of Forbes. This is the List podcast brought to you by the Man Salon, iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. You can watch it on YouTube, listen to it on iTunes and Spotify. Appreciate you guys all listening. We have way more listeners already on this show than I ever thought we would, man. So it's been great to see the numbers from that. All right, Wayne. So as intrigued as I was about the top 10 list of pitchers, people's entertainment ideas and what resonates with them can be much more different than even coming up with a top 10 list of most intimidating pitchers. So I'm very intrigued to see what your top 5 baseball movies of all time are. And again, you and I are different in age, so it'll be interesting to see here. I will tell you first that mine involves more comedy than like baseball itself. So let's see what you have. Let's go 5 and 4, and then we'll go 3, 2, 1. So what do you got at 5 and 4?
Sure, I got The Natural at number 5.
I've never seen it. Never seen it.
Okay, that's your homework for the weekend. Make sure you watch The Natural. Okay, nominated for 4 Oscars. Robert Redford as Roy Hobbs. Now, it's based off the 1952 book by Bernard Malamud, but also there's a true story that actually happened. In 1949, there was a player by the name of Eddie Wakis, played for
Okay.
the Philadelphia Phillies. Is in Chicago, goes into a hotel room with a young woman by the name of Ruth Ann Steinhagen, and she shoots him. So if you read the book, and the book is different than the movie, there are
Okay.
differences, a lot of differences there, but based on a little bit of a true story that there was a baseball player in the late 40s who was shot by a woman who was she was a crazy Chicago Cubs fan. So a
Wow.
little bit of truth there, but the ending of the movie is far better than the ending of the book.
Okay.
So
All right. Sounds good.
yeah, so definitely I love that movie, and
That's my
Robert
homework
Redford.
assignment. I'll
Yeah,
watch it.
my number 4, A League of Their Own. So you referenced this before. If you couldn't tell by the accent, I'm not from the South. Um, so I'm born and raised in the Bronx, and I had that pride still. And that movie was directed by Penny Marshall, a fellow Bronxite, and for another generation, Laverne and Shirley fame. But to me, that movie hits on so many chords because in 1987, there was a documentary on the All American Girls Professional Baseball League, and I hate to say it, kind of, it fell out of favor. People didn't pay attention to it. And it was such a major part of baseball history. And Penny Marshall breathed life into it by taking the documentary and turning it into a movie in the early 90s. And let's not forget the great cast of Tom Hanks, Rosie O'Donnell, Madonna, Gina Davis, Lori Petty. And the Jimmy Dugan character, who was played by Tom Hanks, is a hybrid of Hall of Famers Jimmy Fox and Hack Wilson. So for me, I think it's a beautiful movie. It highlights a tremendous league and women who did extraordinary things during the war, and tremendous athleticism by one of the finest directors of the 80s and 90s, in Penny Marshall.
So I'm glad you had A League of Your Own on yours. Now, I will tell you this. There are a couple of movies that most people like that I don't. And for the longest time, this was one of them, A League of Their Own. And I think it's because I watched it when I was real young. And so I didn't get some of the humor. I didn't get the historical context. And so I always had this joke, anything Rosie O'Donnell's in, I don't want to watch it, right? Like I just would dog on it. And this is terrible. It's like Tom Hanks' worst movie. Give me Forrest Gump. Give me something, so I'd always dog on it. But I had not watched it since I was, I don't know, like 6 or 7, man. Like I was real young when I watched it the first time. So literally in the last few months, one night I say to my wife, you know what? Let's give this movie a second chance and watch it again. It is on my honorable mention list. And anyone that's listened to my local radio show for the last 12 years is probably rolling over right now going, oh, that hypocrite. Because forever I would put it on my bottom 5 of sports movies and everybody would argue with me about it. And I'd always come up with some smart ass comment of why I didn't like it. Now I've watched it again and I thought it was, I got done. I said to my wife, man, I was wrong. And she said, why don't you ever say that to me about things that happen in our life? I said, well, I don't know, man. You didn't put together a production like A League of Their Own, all right? So I got A League of Their Own, honorable mention. All right, number 5, I know that there's no chance in hell that you have this on your top 5. Basketball, okay? It's a movie. It's a movie about basketball and baseball. Have you ever seen Basketball?
Yes, I have.
Okay, so that's not your homework assignment. I mean, I watched it as a kid. I watched it in college. I've watched it as an adult, and I laugh my ass off every single time I watch it. It never was going to get an Oscar, and nor should it, but it entertained the heck out of me. And the fact that they came up with this game that, like, what I loved about it is, as kids, you came up with games, at your house or in the pool or something. And these guys took it to another level, man. So I got Basketball at number 5 purely off of entertainment value. At number 4, this one I've watched a bunch and it resonates because of the team that was involved. Little Big League, where they got the main character. His grandfather owns the Twins. He passes away. He ends up giving the team to him. He names himself the manager and he goes on to lead them to the playoffs. And it was just, I thought it was awesome because it had the Metrodome in it. I always wondered how, man, they just rented the Metrodome and they were able to tape this movie. I thought that was so cool as a kid. And I've probably watched it now 10 times in my life, and I've watched it with my son. He loved it. So at number 4, I have Little Big League. All right, 3 through 1. What do you got, Wayne?
Well, since now I am based in North Carolina, at the University of North Carolina, a stone's throw away there is a team called the Durham Bulls. So I'm going to go Bull Durham. Okay. It was funny because it was an R-rated baseball comedy that beautifully captured the essence of minor league baseball in the mid to late 80s. But what I love so much about Bull Durham, besides the acting, which is fantastic, are the quotes. There are so many memorable quotes, like strikeouts are boring. Besides, they're fascist. $1 million arm with a 5-cent head, or don't think can only hurt the ball club. Or one of my all-time favorites, I want to bring the heater. I want to announce my presence with authority.
That's great, man.
So for me, I love Bull Durham, Kevin Costner, Tim Robbins, Susan Sarandon. They were phenomenal. My number 2, and look, I'm going back to the Bronx a little bit, The Pride of the Yankees. Okay?
Never seen it as well. Wayne, another one I got to watch, huh?
It's fantastic, and you know what, Jeff. We've had so many wonderful conversations throughout the years that I truly have, held in the highest regards. So in preparation for our event today, I went back and rewatched certain parts of Pride of the Yankees on the 4th of July, and couldn't do it better with Lou Gehrig. And 10 Oscar nominations, Gary Cooper. But here's the thing that I brings a laugh to my mind all the time. The scene with Babe Ruth, where Gary Cooper's actually eating Babe Ruth's straw hat. And it was a very funny scene. They're playing cards, and they wanted to really mess with Babe Ruth, and the teammates were biting out the hat. And Gary Cooper is the last one there, and it was such a great interaction. So Pride of the Yankees, definitely there. And my number 1, because it's you, and I've known you for a long time, I'll be always admit this. The end of this movie makes me cry every time, regardless of how old I am. Field of Dreams. If you build it, he will come. And that scene at the end where Kevin Costner and his dad, the John Kinsella character played by Dwight Brown, and the simple thing is saying, "Hey, Dad, you want to have a catch?" That gets me. Both of us being parents to children, and understanding that significance in a child's life, that parent-to-child dynamic of just simply throwing a baseball is purely magical. So for that reason, that's why Field of Dreams is my number 1.
I'm going to tell you, the other movie that I used to dog on all the time is Field of Dreams. And it's not because it's a terrible movie. It's because it's sad at the end, and I hate it like that. I'll be honest with you, man. So I'm the guy that loves comedy, and that's why all mine have humor to it. I don't watch a lot of sad movies, Wayne, because I'm the guy that's crying throughout the movie. There's just certain movies over the years that make me absolutely bawl. And so that one, I've always said the field and going to it is better than the movie, because I've been fortunate to go there a couple of different times and throw baseballs on that field. I got to play a game one.
Wow. That's unbelievable.
That movie, in its sense, it was too sad at the end for me, so it's not on my top 5 list, but I understand why so many people love it. And if you get a chance to go check that place out, they got all the renovations going on now too. Going to be neat when they have another Major League Baseball game. But really what I think you could tell, Wayne, with that movie, how much it meant to people is when they played that first Major League Baseball game there. And It was just like everyone had the emotions come back to them of watching that movie, and then everything, the players soaking it in. Like that to me is one of the best things Major League Baseball ever did, was to play one game a year there. And I know they're doing renovations now, and they'll have another one. But don't you think that's one of the best things they ever did?
I loved it. And know what made it special? Kevin Costner coming out of the corn and having the speech, the players coming out. I liked everything about it. And obviously I know they're doing the renovations and everything right now. I love to have the games there all the time. And I know the logistics are a little challenging for Major League Baseball, but seeing Aaron Judge hit home runs into the corn was just beautiful from my perspective. So
I agree, man.
I loved it.
I agree. All right, at number 3 for me, I have The Sandlot. It's just a classic movie that, again, another one that I found myself rewatching with my kids. And I think for my generation, that's an iconic movie. growing up in the 90s. He gets his dad's Babe Ruth ball eaten by a dog, his stepdad's. I mean, there's so much history in that movie too that they reference, that it's one that if it's on TV and you're flipping through and you stop and watch, you don't even have to watch from the beginning. You can pick it up at any moment and you can enjoy it. And number 2, it's another movie that I've watched a ton. Rookie of the Year, Rowan Gardner, and he gets his arm broken, and then he ends up being able to throw, and then he doesn't at the end, and he figures out a way to win the game. Rowan Gardner, to me, and Rookie of the Year is one that just takes me back to my childhood. Another movie I've rewatched with my son Beckham, who just loves these sports movies. That one I found great. Again, using Wrigley. I love when they can use the stadium actually in the movie. It always just, trips me out. And number 1, this was the first rated R movie I ever got to watch. And my grandfather let me rent movies when I'd go to his house. God rest his soul, Harlan Turn. He would let me go rent movies at the little, gas station there. And, he didn't want me renting rated R movies. But he didn't look at the rating on this one because it was about baseball. It shouldn't be that hard. Major League is number 1 on my list. And I remember, I got home from that week hanging out with my grandparents, and I'm telling all my friends new words. Where I have new sayings that I can say with them. And I got to watch my first rated R movie, man. And then Major League 2 was an honorable mention for me. But, I just thought that thing makes me laugh so hard. And, the Indians were god awful, and then they became great. Wild Thing. And the dude with the snake and all the ritual. Yeah, man. That thing just makes me howl. So my 5 through 1, basketball at 5, which will be on no one else's top 5 list. Little Big League, Sandlot at 3, Rookie of the Year at 2, and Major League at 1. One more time, run through your list, Wayne.
Number 5, The Natural. Number 4, A League of Their Own. Number 3, Bull Durham. Number 2, The Pride of the Yankees. And number 1, Field of Dreams. So
I'm going to be watching The Pride of the Yankees. And I got it. What the other one is? What's it called again that I got to watch at 5?
Well, The Natural.
The Natural and Pride of the Yankees. I will have on my homework list. Wayne, this was a blast. Thanks for hanging out on the List podcast, man.
Jeff, always an honor and a privilege to talk baseball with you. Thank you.
Thank you, man. As another page is turned here on the list, check us out, iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube. We'll talk soon, y'all. Be well.